How a bad economy led to millions of deaths. In 1976, a group of Finnish economists decided to study the net effect of smoking on the national economy over a period of 27 years. They followed individual smokers and non-smokers and recorded their contribution to the economy and the burden resulting from taxes, social security, and health costs. The economists argued that smokers contributed less to the economy or constituted a net burden because they were more likely to get sick, put a strain on healthcare infrastructure, and were less productive even when they were relatively healthy. The average life expectancy of smokers was 8.6 years lower than that of non-smokers. This is because most smokers did not die while participating in economic production, but much earlier, after retirement. Their average net contribution to public finances was higher by €133,000 compared to non-smokers. Only when the economists who conducted the study softened and began to consider the value of human life did the results reverse. If you find the video you watch useful, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and support us with a donation. Your help is precious to us and will allow us to continue producing quality content for you. You can do it here below, through the appropriate buttons, subscribe, and thanks. The logical conclusion of the study is that governments should encourage smoking to maximize economic production. Since the economy is largely a matter of what to do with limited resources, these fatal compromises must be considered, and the right choice is not always obvious. This also implies that economic decision makers, from heads of state to ordinary people, do not make decisions guided by ideology, personal interest, or simple ignorance, but act logically to maximize a positive outcome. The consequences of such complex decisions, even if made with the best intentions, can cost billions of lives throughout human history. Even more worrying is the fact that many of the mistakes made in the past, of which economists were simply unaware or not involved, are still being made today. What are the most glaring examples of economic failures in history that we should learn from? What mistakes are we making today? Finally, how many billions of people have died as a result of wrong economic policies? Economics is a depressing subject if you look at the numbers. It gives us an idea of how much human misery is created even when people are guided by the best intentions. Economics as a discipline is currently in crisis. Microeconomists, who study small interactions and individual decision-making processes, have been exposed from all sides for falsifying research results and providing only apparently interesting results rather than actually truthful ones. Macroeconomists, on the other hand, have discussed their ideas for decades. Unfortunately, this is because macroeconomic experiments are very difficult to conduct. What macroeconomists can do is learn from history, and unfortunately, there is no shortage of mistakes to learn from. In 1958, China, which was rebuilding its economy under the new communist regime after World War II, sought to increase steel production to modernize itself. Economic theory predicted that steel was a necessary element for the construction of modern industrial plants and that the more steel there was, the more factories, machinery, and infrastructure could be built, thus increasing overall production and resources that could be shared by all parties involved. In theory, this is not a bad thing. In today's world, economic growth and steel consumption are highly correlated for this very reason. If an economy uses steel equipment, it can produce and develop more steel products. However, in theory, the Chinese approach is a valid economic idea, perhaps even implemented with the best intentions to improve the situation. This greatly improved the quality of life of all city dwellers and led to the construction of backyard kitchens. Instead of investing in a small number of high-quality ironworks, the Chinese government of the time encouraged peasants to build rudimentary furnaces with bricks and clay and to burn any fuel they could find, including wood, tools, and, in some cases, coffins. The government of the time encouraged the construction of backyard furnaces so actively that the peasants devastated entire forests around their fields, prioritizing steel production over crops. The government knew this, but believed that if they could rapidly increase steel production and industrialize, they could use tractors and modern harvesting tools instead of the basic tools used by those same peasants, which would greatly increase agricultural production in the long run. And so it was. Today, agriculture is highly industrialized, and a farmer with a combine harvester can do as much work as 100 farmers with manual tools in the same amount of time. Unfortunately, the Chinese economy did not realize that industrial development leads to the production of more steel, but the production of more steel does not create industrial development. Among other factors, the widespread use of backyard kitchens was one of the main causes of the Great Famine in China. The famine began a year later and killed between 15 and 55 million people. The tragedy was not caused by violence, but by wrong decisions. This failed economic project not only distracted peasants from agriculture, but also caused soil erosion due to trees being cut down around fields to supply the furnaces. Even the millions of workers who joined forces to produce steel for the good of the nation were fully in agreement with the party's ideology. But despite all this damage, they produced really poor quality steel that was useless, and most of it had to be reworked in normal steelworks, as it probably should have been in the first place. It is easy to look back at these decisions and realize that, just as it is easy to encourage many people to smoke, it was never a good idea to encourage people in a predominantly agricultural country to stop farming and destroy their fields, even if there was an economic justification for doing so. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of other historical lessons of this kind. Not to mention cases where economics is deliberately used as a weapon to enslave entire peoples and nations through trade restrictions and sanctions. In these cases, the end may justify the means, and economic military action may be considered preferable to military action, but there will still be victims. This becomes much more difficult when hindsight or untested theories cannot be used to determine what is in the best interest of economic actors, continuing to focus on policies that are in their interest. It is important to realize that economics is not just about making people as rich as possible, but is a discipline that has an enormous impact on everyone in the world, not because we feel more important than chemists and physicists on whom Nobel Prize-winning films are made, but because we take economic policy seriously and understand that economic success is a demonstration of the need to understand what it is. It may seem a bit philosophical, but that is the point. There is currently a real debate among the leading experts in the field about what the role of a good economist should be. On the one hand, there are those who argue that economics is a science like any other and that everything must be done through careful experimentation and the provision of data. To do this, economists must find and support policies that maximize measurable outcomes such as production, wealth, and human development. According to the world's leading economists and, above all, the economists who make policy decisions in governments and organizations around the world, a clinical and data-based approach to economics has been crucial for effective management of the planet over the past 40 years. This trend is favored by the fact that computers have made it much easier to collect and analyze economic data. The use of data and rigorous analysis can tell leaders what to do to maximize measurable outcomes, eliminating much of the emotion and, above all, ideology from the economic process. In short, it eliminates the possibility of making economy-destroying mistakes by assuming to know everything better than anyone else. Of course, while the scientific method is fine, this approach has fatal flaws. An obvious problem is that politicians do not always follow the advice of economic advisors. Furthermore, ideas that are too technical are even more difficult to explain to the public, who in a well-functioning democracy must make the final decisions. Sometimes a good enough idea that is actually implemented is better than a perfect economic plan that is never considered. There is also the problem of applying rigorous statistics to a science that is inherently focused on humans. If an economist is only interested in maximizing measurable outcomes, their solution to the tram problem would be to invest a person tied to the tracks, then turn around and invest a second person. This is because they have eliminated 6 economically dependent people and doubled the working hours of the tram drivers. It may seem exaggerated, but these solutions, supported by modern economic theory, exist. Another serious problem with treating economics, especially on a macro scale, like any other science is that it is much more difficult, and in many cases impossible, to conduct experiments with economics. This is because economics has millions of unpredictable variables that cannot be controlled like in a sterile laboratory experiment. Conducting microeconomic experiments focused on individuals and their decision-making processes is also a known difficulty. This is because economists sometimes assume that people are perfectly rational, but it is clear that they are anything but rational. Finally, an excessively data-driven approach to economic decision-making improves easily measurable indicators rather than intangibles such as self-fulfillment and human well-being, which are much more difficult to enter into data analysis software, but perhaps even more important than elements such as net per capita production. Of course, the main focus is on improving the. An alternative to the ruthless approach of economists to data is that economists, who are essentially philosophers, identify what people really value and how they can achieve this goal. Angus Deaton received the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2015 for his work analyzing the role of economic consumption in human well-being. Since then, he has published several works, including Economics for the Common Good, in which he argues for an alternative view of how modern economists should study economics. His arguments are particularly relevant to one of the most important economic issues currently being debated: globalization. Globalization is the general trend of countries to trade, invest, and cooperate more freely, rather than being completely self-sufficient. Just as we become richer as individuals by specializing in different types of work and collaborating with others, countries gain many of the same benefits by specializing in certain sectors and trading with other countries to acquire goods and services in which they are not competent. According to almost all measurable economic indicators, globalization has become a major force in the world economy. It has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and has allowed countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan, and India to develop world-leading industries. It has also allowed traditionally rich countries like the United States, Australia, Canada, and Western Europe to enjoy consumer goods at much lower prices than those produced locally with more highly paid national labor. Household appliances that were once considered great luxuries, such as washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and flat-screen televisions, are now common in most households in developed countries. In addition, companies in developed countries, especially the United States, not only benefit from low wages and economies of scale in places like Asia, but also reap huge benefits from opening up hundreds of new markets and billions of new potential customers. This is clearly a win-win situation, with some benefiting much more than others. Moreover, especially in developed countries, the wealth created by the global industry has been enormous, and yet random things have become cheaper, while really important things, especially housing, have become much more expensive. Highly paid workers, investors, and global citizens earn more today by working and investing in organizations that have grown rapidly through global trade. Supermarket workers can only add value through their work, and if a supermarket wants to make profits, it must develop technology that can be sold globally, manage trade routes for importing companies, or create videos on YouTube that will be consumed by a global audience. For a given amount of work, no more value added can be earned than the person who creates it. This second group can create less value added for the local economy, but more for the global economy, thus constantly earning more and beating those who do ordinary work for limited resources such as housing. These difficult to measure problems have very real consequences for people. In the United States, in 1992, college graduates had a life expectancy of 2.6 years higher than those without a college degree. In 2019, this gap will have more than doubled to 6.3 years and in 2021 to 8.5 years. Deaton's study argues that today's economy, driven by globalization, is unable to recognize the enormous consequences of such rapid change. Statistics show that for every 1% increase in unemployment in the United States, there are 40,000 deaths. In serious social problems such as the opioid epidemic and the severe housing shortage, Deaton and a growing number of economists make a similar connection, blaming economic policies that look good on paper but in reality harm many people. The solutions are difficult to find. If the economy were based solely on numbers, we would find ourselves in a world like this. If the economy is based solely on numbers, we will end up in a world where the government encourages smoking to reduce pressure on the pension system. But if economics becomes a philosophy, or worse, a politics, we could easily find ourselves with backyard furnaces encouraging the growth of a collectivized heavy industry. The table of those who finish eating at McDonald's is covered with disposable packaging paper. If they do not throw away the waste, McDonald's will have to pay someone to clean up the waste, thus stimulating employment. This is because there is no clear right answer, because we will present the absolutely best answer in the next video, and because we have treated these questions so much in our basic economics videos that, as usual, we do not want to repeat them here. What was your experience with the topic covered in this video? Tell us about it in the comments, we are curious to know. And if you have any doubts or questions, don't hold back. Leave a comment, even just a simple like would be perfect, but most importantly, subscribe to the channel to stay informed about upcoming releases.